Hello, everybody.
Well, hello.
I always wanted to do this, and it's time for the news.
Yeah.
BBC could never.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there we go. Welcome, everybody. This is our next episode in actually our bioactive breakdown series. So we have a couple of great guests today, and today's topic is beyond claims: how AI is redefining evidence, trust, and product credibility, which is a huge area. It's infiltrating, the technology is infiltrating all industries. There's no question about that. And so we're going to deep dive that with our panels here today. So I'll introduce Elijah here. Elijah is Director of Product Development Brand Ambassador for Irwin Naturals, and he is also on the Scientific Advisory Board for NutriSelect.ai. So Elijah, how about saying hello and introduce yourself real quickly?
Yeah. Well, I first off appreciate you having me on today. Obviously, it's a big topic, AI and how it's influencing things. I certainly have a lot of opinions, a lot of thoughts on this. So
Great.
Excited to get into it. I come from a clinical background, so I think uniquely in the industry, there's not a whole lot of clinicians leading product development out there, at least as far as I'm aware. So I do bring a bit of a different lens to the conversation in terms of just layering in the clinical perspective into formulating products that are on shelf. So excited to get into the conversation with you all.
Great.
Cool. And awesome. I'll introduce Xenia. So this is Xenia Framrose. Now, Xenia is the founder and the CEO of Aletheios, a very unique clinical research organization. She brings something sort of very unique to that whole category of CROs. So Xenia, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit here?
And Jean and Elijah, great to meet you as well. I'm the CEO and founder of Aletheios, and the company is focused on lowering the barriers to evidence generation for both researchers and participants. And the reason I'm so excited about this conversation is, obviously it is a huge topic, and hour will not be enough for us to get into all of the nitty gritty. But to me, generative AI, and if we're talking specifically about LLMs, have an incredible ability to democratize the space, particularly on clinical trial design, generating that high quality evidence and analyzing and disseminating that evidence. So I think there's lots to be optimistic about and lots to be incredibly, incredibly cautious about. So excited to get into it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Awesome. Glad to have you here. So our question to frame the whole episode here is, if AI is increasingly evaluating evidence, influencing purchasing behavior, and shaping perceptions, then what does that mean for scientific rigor, clinical relevance, and consumer trust? That's our question we're going to attempt to answer. And again, I agree with you, Xenia. We can't do it in an hour or less. But this is just a continuing conversation that we'll jump into. So, to give it a little more framing, our historical reliance is, Jean and I have been in the industry really long time. We're definitely the OG category. I forgot what that stands for, but anyway, there's a historical reliance on structure function claims. I remember actually in 97, 98, when we were doing the Centrum Herbal project, and, Deshay was just passed in 94. It was like May of 98, where in the middle of the product launch, that the FDA issued its guidance for structure function claims, and marketing had to redo all their materials. They hated it. So, and that hasn't changed. There's a historical reliance on that and how we do that. And so, and again, why are those claims alone no longer sufficient in a data transparent world? Well, that's what we're going to get into, and how the rise of AI is impacting that.
Yeah. And so what I want to mention is about how substantiation has traditionally been interpreted in the industry. And, essentially in many ways, it's been interpreted by, do you have some data, hopefully human clinical data, to support the ingredients that are in your product? Some more forward-thinking brands have actually worked with people like Xenia at Lithios to conduct studies on their finished good and to be able to show that as a means to substantiate the the claims that are being made for their product. But the problem is not everybody is following those rules, and so there's a big gap between being compliant with the regulations, having good research to support claims, and consumer trust, because they're finding out that a lot of claims being made aren't adequately substantiated.
That's right. So let's dig into it. Let's talk about from claims to credibility and what is actually changing. All right, and I think both of our panelists and certainly Gina and I have our fingers on the pulse for that. So are claims becoming obsolete? That's a provocative question. And so what, what's the difference between legal compliance, which is always different. I'm telling you how many meetings I've been as a regulatory person with legal at the same time in marketing and wordsmithing claims. It's laborious, the task to do that always. And also debating on what's enough scientific rigor and what's the perceived credibility. But consumers are going to change this as well because they are increasingly distrusting the traditional marketing narrative. So I'd like to hear from both Elijah and Xenia. You guys, Elijah, would you start from you, from your standpoint, your perspective, what your experience? Yeah, that'd be great.
So, I mean, are claims becoming obsolete? It is a very interesting question. I think personally, claims aren't becoming obsolete. They're becoming insufficient in a way. A claim is used as the primary signal of credibility for most products. Increasingly, but it's just a starting point. So claims, let's just break it down. Claims still serve an important function. They translate science into accessible language. They anchor regulatory compliance. They create a bridge between mechanism and consumer need. But what's changing is a claim is no longer the final authority. It's now subject to scrutiny. So consumers and increasingly AI systems can ask, what does support this claim? What was the study population? Is the endpoint meaningful? Is the form comparable? So the claim becomes a hypothesis, not a conclusion anymore. So to me, yes, the answer that I have on that is the claims are still very important. They serve a function, but the dynamic of how they're analyzed and the impact they have is certainly changing with the introduction of the AI systems out there.
Yeah. And, speaking of the AI systems, Elijah, I want to toss this one out at Xenia. So how does AI evaluate evidence differently than humans? And where does algorithmic scoring outperform marketing language? What are your thoughts on those?
Well, you're giving me all of the tough ones, Gene. First, I would just say I really agree with Elijah. I think that a claim is no longer the destination. A claim is the floor. And I think when I look at that, by the way, I see opportunity in that. Because what that really is saying is that the standard claim, the standard study that we're going to submit to regulators, that we're going to put on the packaging, that we're going to show to a consumer is no longer enough to sell, to convince, to persuade. That to me is an opportunity. And when AI looks at the evidence, that's where the opportunity comes into play. When you are analyzing and looking at it, it is easier than ever now to look and do subgroup analyses. It's easier than ever to look for different patterns in the data that you have actually generated. And that's something that we work on. I think something that everyone is working on. But when it's easier to collect data, easier to analyze data, and easier to make that data meaningful in certain ways to consumers, there's also a lot of risk. And that comes with how AI interprets evidence. Now, to be fair, AI is in some ways can be just as biased as any other way in which data is analyzed. It depends on how you train your model. It depends on what your input is. It depends on how you frame a question. But broadly, I think the opportunity there is that, AI doesn't imagine exactly yet. AI is pattern recognition. So there is an opportunity for when you have a really great model and you've trained your own framework to do this, you can exclude some of the bias. One of the things that I definitely worry about, which I know we're going to talk about down the line, is publication bias and the corpus of data that
Yeah.
even sort of open LLMs are trained on has a bias. And I think about that a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, that's it's funny you say that because it's been
Yeah,
part of my
that's
rhetoric.
your bread and butter, Bill.
Yeah, it's been part of my rhetoric for a long time. And I'm talking with ingredient companies and product brands out there as part of NutriSelect and our accelerator program. And if you think about it, all the research that's been done to date, all of it, thousands and thousands of published studies, is already skewed in some aspect and biased for various reasons. Marketing trends, the research that gets done is driven by marketing trends, our marketing departments, our budgets, or whatever. It's not necessarily objectively on the science. And, there are some pure research organizations that do that. But of course, that's not a profitable business model in our industry, right? So,
No.
so anyway, this is why I find it fascinating, especially with the platform we're building. We're definitely what these LLM models can do is predict and identify those gaps when they look at thousands of data points without introducing any bias. But it has to be trained appropriately, as you say, so that you don't. And in fact, we've talked about this in our team. Not to introduce our own biases because we have a certain way of thinking about outcomes, right? How many times, Gene, have we been in debates with scientists about p-values in terms of primary outcomes, right? It's like,
Right.
but let's continue that on and talk about evidence curation, right? And signal versus noise, because we're already touching on that. And so, Xenia, in terms of data ingestion, what actually gets fed into the AI models, okay? And also, you mentioned publication bias and data weighting, statistical significance versus clinical significance, and the danger of data without context. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I think context is the most important thing and probably the most important word anyone's going to use on the call, right? Because AI is great at stats. Like AI can do you can use Julius AI and do a two-sided t-test in like half a second. But without the context for where that data is coming from, how it was collected, time-stamped, from whom, in what way, that interpretation can sometimes be meaningless. And that's the same sort of paradigm you could apply to potentially statistical significance and clinical relevance. Like, a lot of our studies will look at inflammation. And you look at a biomarker like HSCRP. If you're measuring that in the wrong way at the wrong time or not frequently enough, it can just be noisy. And maybe you see a movement of, a couple points here and there, but that may not have any bearing on what somebody is actually experiencing. And that is what a lot of these AI models are actually moving consumers towards, certainly moving me towards as a patient in my life. And you both know I've had, Dr. Elijah does not know, but I have had long COVID for a very long time. And I have used many of the LLMs to try and understand what is going on. And, many of the tests, many of the interventions, I'm sure, moved some biomarker here or there, had a great publication with a 0.001 p-value. Didn't really make much of a difference to me. And those are things that are going to become more and more important when you train on evidence. Outcomes-based research is important.
Right.
I just want to add that I was thinking when we were talking about, what information is fed into AI, and it reminds me of the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. And that if you don't put in the right kind of information, you're not going to get the right kind of response. I probably the most common way that I personally use AI is as a research assistant. When I'm looking for specific types of data, I will use my own, going to PubMed, going to other databases to search for data. But sometimes I go to AI a lot and say, cite human clinical research on XYZ. And so much of the time, if you don't start it out with cite this, they'll tell you about something. And then if you go back and say, okay, cite the references for that, sometimes it changes. What it tells you changes because they don't have references for that. They took it off of some website.
Yeah, context
somewhere. Right.
context.
And so
Yeah.
you have to give specifically what you want. And then after it cites it for you, go to that source and then read it yourself and see if the conclusions that it drew were in fact accurate to what it is that you're looking for. Because
Well-
in a number of cases, it isn't.
Yeah, and the other piece that the corollary to that on context is whoever's looking at any of that or getting that information has to have the domain expertise. Okay.
Right.
They have to be knowledgeable in that space. And I can tell you from NutraSelect's perspective, because the last several months have been out raising capital, and this is the feedback I'm getting through our startups.com network and through investment firms and stuff like that. Last year was all about investing in the shiny new AI toy or whatever, right? But there was no sustainability in any of that. Everybody just wants to get into the space. Investors have taken a step back now and are really structured in going into with founders and with companies that have the domain expertise. Okay, because anybody could code something with the tools today, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't know how to train it or program it in the right appropriate way without having that expertise. There's no substitute for the expertise Gene has 45 years or 30 years for me in terms of knowing the science and supplements. There's no substitute for that. No AI, it's just a tool. No AI can replace that. So, and then from your perspective, Elijah, as being a practitioner and all that, what are your thoughts here in terms of from your perspective on this, in terms of what matters?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I remember when I was in medical school, we spent literally a year, possibly 2 years, learning how to properly search PubMed, using mesh terms and everything, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of going back a little bit in this conversation, a lot of that is irrelevant nowadays. You can go on, your GPTs and pull up the data that you're looking for. However, to Gene's point, like often what you're getting, you have to have the context to understand, is this accurate? I personally use it to identify and find things in the big sea of research out there. But then that's pretty much where it stops for me. From there, I have to actually take my eyes and look at it. So like when I look at a study, really it's here's my framework. I look at the effect size. Is the magnitude meaningful? Something that Zena kind of alluded to there. Is this going to actually translate into is this a real world outcome? Is this something that somebody can feel? One of my patients, are they going to feel this change? Because sometimes in the research, something could be statistically significant, but it's something like, if the thermostat senses a change in 0.5 degree in the room temperature, but are you actually going to feel that difference? Probably not, right? But it's statistically significant. There is a change in the temperature, but I can't really feel that, right? But so I do have to look at, is the magnitude of the change meaningful? Number two, I look at, compared to baseline variability, is the improvement beyond normal biologic fluctuation? This is really important in a lot of the testosterone studies done out there, right? You got something that may change or a significant difference of maybe 3%, but that's within your regular variation throughout the day for men, right? So is that really is it significant beyond normal biological fluctuation? That's a question I have to ask myself. 3 is, would a patient feel this? That's kind of what I was alluding to. So, a real world example, I said testosterone. Now let's take a different example, maybe like a sleep study, a sleep supplement study. Mm-hmm. Sleep onset reduced by, let's say, 7 minutes, statistically significant. Yes. P-value less than 0.05. However, clinically speaking, most patients are not going to perceive a 7-minute change in their sleep, onset of sleep. So, what I have to look at is the effect size, confidence intervals, baseline variability, patient perceived changes, and all this becomes super relevant and is context that I have that I think your average person doesn't really have out there. So if they're looking at research and they're relying on the AI systems to kick out valuable guidance and information on some data, a lot of time it is missed unless that system is trained to really identify and take into consideration these aspects that we're talking about here. So, I think that's, to the NutraSelect topic, one of the biggest challenges in algorithm design is teaching systems to weigh effect size, not just p-value.
Right. It's all those parameters that we want to look at, not even just what we look at as readers of scientific papers or evaluating the research. When you're trying to collate all that data, we can use it as a tool. And you think about it from a technology standpoint, if you look at the wearable devices like Fitbit, Garmin, and all that, Apple Watch, they're not 100% reliable in terms of their predictions. They're pretty good, 90+% or so, but it's just like any other tool. So we're going to see this technology become way more sophisticated. And by the way, I've said it before, LLMs and predictive AI and looking at collating thousands of data points, that technology's been around for a while. When we talk about AI, a lot of people immediately think ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or something like that, which are generative AI platforms that are conversational. Those are actually pretty cool. We've all seen the videos and pictures created from them, which look pretty real, So think of it, which is a great segue into our next topic on ethics, right? We already hear about fake news, and I was personally in a crisis situation past Sunday.
Yes, you were. My goodness.
And in Puerto Vallarta, and I don't want to sensationalize it at all, really, but it was pretty surreal. And even the media sensationalized it a little bit. When it hit the U.S. media about 24 hours later in that cycle, I had already seen all the videos locally of neighborhoods that I lived in, streets that I was on, places I was just at the day before, with cars in flames, buses in flames, stuff like that. But then all the fake stuff started to populate social media, right? And so how do you, we already deal with this sort of thing in social media platforms anyway, but with the advances of AI, which is going to get even more sophisticated, how are we going to, there's some ethics that starts to touch on this in terms of what's real and what isn't, and how do you verify and validate that? So let's talk about that. If an AI system if the ethics of algorithmic credibility, I think we're already touching on some of this here, but what are ways that we could, anybody wants to jump in, what are ways that we can address these in terms of what we're developing or using these tools so that we can be transparent about it and ensure that what we're talking about is real?
Oh boy. No, I would like you to go.
Well, I would say inherent in the question of asking about AI ethics, I think, is recognizing the incredible sort of operational opportunity that tools like this provide for us, which means significantly more distribution, significantly more people able to ask research questions, participate in the answering of those research questions as participants. So, have an opinion about how a claim is developed, disseminated, how a claim is interpreted. I think all of that is actually tremendously exciting. Not to directly quote Gene's garbage in, garbage out, but on an ethical standpoint, when you are looking at all of the corpus of data that AI is trained on, what does that publication bias actually look like? It looks like dogma around statistical significance, which we've already touched on. It's also looking at who was able to do studies in the first place, right? To a degree, AI is scoring how much you were able to spend on a really well-powered, well-designed study because you were Merck or Lilly versus, whether or not you weren't able to do that. You're also skewing incredibly positive results. Nobody is publishing their null results, which are incredibly valuable. So there's an opportunity here to explore the ethics of doing different study designs, looking at different areas. That to me is more than answering the question of like what to be careful of. I want to make sure I don't lose the chance to talk about where the opportunity is for also a more democratized approach to how we do this. Yes, be careful. Don't be bad. Those two as well.
Elijah, how about you, man?
I'm just thinking of this in terms of like AI, grading product credibility, right? And so like I'll just, say, AI doesn't make value judgments in a vacuum. It does apply structured criteria, dose alignment, study strength, endpoint relevance. If a product scores lower based on an AI kind of value score, the first question shouldn't be who's to blame, but rather it should be, does the formula align with the evidence being cited? Accountability exists at multiple levels. A model designer must be transparent about methodology, and brands must be transparent about formulation integrity. And that's really where it comes down to. So, who's accountable in that scenario? Really, there's interpretation of the data needs to be done, skillfully and with full transparency. So in a way, everyone kind of shares that in a way, that accountability. But I think there is that idea that, AI doesn't, makes value judgments incorrectly, but, it really comes down to design, really, in my opinion. So
I agree.
Yeah. And I just go ahead.
Yeah.
One last thing, then I promise I'm going to be a little more quiet. But I think also
don't be quiet.
In the macro situation of ethics that we're dealing with right now, how AI is being deployed, not just in our industry, but in many industries. I mean, Claude, just scrapped their AI safety policy 2 days ago or something like that. There's also the issue of how you handle the ethics as a user of the product, but these companies are also thinking about ethics and sometimes also not. And I think that's an important thing for us to think about, because we are the ones sometimes taking these tools and putting them in the hands of consumers in new and different ways than someone just interacting with an LLM. And it seems very much like this infrastructure layer of the LLM models are saying, yeah, you take care of it, take on the liability. And that's going to be interesting, because let's say, with a tremendous amount of training, someone convinces ChatGPT to say, this product is the best product and this is what you should take, and here are some publications. And the LLM itself is trained to respond in that way. In the same way that brands and different customers responded to the algorithm scoring of an Instagram with all types of different content, making it really hard to see what is real content, what is sponsored content. What is going to be a brand's response when ChatGPT says, your brand sucks? What are we going to face? That's where I think about a lot of ethics.
Oh, I have something on that, but Gene, you had some.
I had just wanted to say, I wanted to echo what Elijah was talking about, and kind of like, who's responsible. And that's why part of, with regard to NutriSelect.ai, one of the things I like about people like Elijah and myself, being on the scientific advisory board, we are resources to help sort of teach AI the direction, what to look at. You're able to use us for those purposes, because it's really, really important that it's done right, and that big, huge, gaping holes aren't left and mistakes aren't made, so that at the end, a consumer is going to have some confidence that the information they're receiving has some accuracy. It's so important, and also from an ethical standpoint, the same reason why you can't be a brand and just buy your way into it. It has dollars spent will have no bearing on the outcome of the scoring. So I just wanted to put that in for good measure. So Bill, you were going to say something about
it's something when you mentioned Instagram, I have a personal experience with leveraging that. So, but before I get into that, to Elijah's point, in terms of transparency, I think you were talking about, for NutriSelect, we are very transparent, and we will be. That's why we have the science team and the domain expertise behind that. It's not just clinical evidence, it's sustainability evidence, it's third-party testing, it's claims you're making as a product brand. All these things are going to factor in. And this was a huge topic of discussion in the CRN webinar in early December last year. Okay, so we had myself and the co-founder for Ingredient AI, that's Akash, and Ken Myers on the regulatory side. And so, basically, if you're sitting on the sidelines thinking, okay, this is just like what you see in social media, GPT and all this kind of stuff and these cool videos, the train has left the station. The technology is already infiltrating all companies at many levels. And so if you're not using it as to become an AI first company where you're leveraging the technology to operate more efficiently, that's a different aspect from what we're talking about in terms of products and how this is going to affect formulation and all that. And we talk a lot about that. On your Instagram sort of story, I'm actually doing a campaign because here's some things that most people don't know, right? If you're using GPT or these other platforms, there's a bunch of settings on the back end that I bet nobody looks at. In fact, I know they don't. They're just default settings. But if you don't tailor those settings and coach it in terms of what you want it to do in the platform, it's going to do whatever, right? It's going to do whatever those settings are. So, for example, for security purposes, talking about ethics, and we'll close that out, but anything you put in there, if you put proprietary information, if you don't toggle off that this is not to train the engine, it's going to share that information. So I bet a lot of people don't even know that. And the reason I know it is because as a startup advisor in our group, we have a weekly meeting with our AI and ML group, and we talk about all these things. I've learned so much that the average consumer is not really aware of many of these sort of things that go on there. But from the Instagram thing, so that body of information is out there in terms of strategies. A lot of marketing people are not only have the experience, but then there are new people coming in that are leveraging these tools that can do it even more effectively in terms of that. So I'm actually doing it myself with my Instagram. I'm posting, I'm doing to train the algorithm. I did it. I'm in phase 3. It actually is working to increase. It's really working. And I didn't have to have a marketing experience to do that. Anyway, so just kind of a side in that, it's a great tool to do a lot of things that you never thought you could actually do before. But let's transition here, cognizant of our time here. Let's jump into what are the implications for brands and product development. Elijah, how about you start us off with that one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, current real world use cases would include, AI is absolutely excellent at rapid literature review, dose comparison versus competitive labels, like flagging underdosed inclusions, evaluating citation strength. For example, like let's just say you're building a metabolic formula. AI will instantly show, most human trials use, let's just say 500 milligrams of ingredient X. Majority of retail formulas include 150 milligrams. So that informs your decision a bit, right? But AI doesn't manage capsule fill constraints, cost targets, retail pricing, supply volatility, stability of ingredients under heat. So AI is an incredibly fast research assistant, like Gene had mentioned, but it's not the architect of the building, right? It's like having the world's fastest calculator, but you still have to decide what equation you're going to solve. It's very valuable in certain ways, but it still doesn't replace that creative piece that really takes into consideration all the variables that go into product development and actually building a product that's efficacious, shelf stable, and easy to consume for consumers. So AI will accelerate information, but it doesn't eliminate the trade-offs, essentially, right?
I just want to add to what you were saying, Elijah. Things that AI isn't going to be able to do. One of the things also is when you have experience as a formulator and you have experience working with many, many different raw material companies, you get a sense of the ones that are trustworthy, the ones that have very, very good documentation, the ones that you're likely to want to do business with because of these factors. And so that's something that AI doesn't have personal relationships and isn't able to have the years of background to make value judgments on what is a good source. It may just look at two CFAs out there and say, okay, these are equivalent. Right. Whereas, from some of the players involved, there's a chance that they're not equivalent.
Right.
Just wanted to add that.
At least not yet, until you train to build something that knows to look for that. Okay. So that's what ingredient AI is doing. Okay. All right. So it's coming. Xenia, how about from your perspective in terms of predictive modeling and clinical research? I know you're working a lot with that with your platform. Such a cool platform. But love to hear it.
I think it's going to become more and more valuable, as Jean was saying, to be human, to understand emotion, to be creative, to tell stories. That is going to become incredibly more valuable as time goes by. And as a humanities major, I love that. In terms of how, so then if that's valuable, what is being taken away by AI? What is AI actually focusing on? Clinical research has a tremendous amount of busy work, like just a lot of content and a lot of things that can be replaced by agents. And that's an approach and a framework that we use at Alethios all the time. Certainly, as Dr. Elijah was saying, the pre-trial phase of identifying gaps in the literature, quick literature reviews, figuring out, lightweight feasibility of what a study could look like or how it could be designed. All of that is incredible. All of that is baked into a lot of the work that we do as well. But then there are all of these opportunities that are beyond content, right? Like one of the things we do, which is what everyone loves the most, is you can download the entire study for the IRB in a single click, and you can digitize your protocol by just uploading it. Those two things together save hours and hours of work from a PI or a research team, which frees them up to think about, is this a good study design? Have I included the right population? What should my statistical analysis plan do? Can it be more robust than it is right now? I think that is tremendous. So a lot of the stuff that you can do there is exciting. I think the other sort of busy work of clinical research can be done by agents in a lot of situations. Those are things that we look at, but I think the way that we operate at Alethios is we're right now working with researchers who want to do research faster, better, cheaper. What AI opens up for us, when you think about how it can consolidate and disseminate expertise, is how do you bring in people to do research fast, well, and affordably, who have never actually been in that world before? How do you create a bigger market of who can be involved in this process? And I said at the beginning, I'm very interested in how these tools can democratize the process, but doing it well and doing that democratization well, making sure people are still doing good science, is a big part of how we think AI can play a role in clinical research tooling.
Yeah. And I think it's important to frame this. Is it shortening the research cycle? It is to a point on the front end and back end, but in the middle, there still takes 12 weeks to run a study, right? People have
biology in the middle,
there's the
right?
yeah, right. There's still biology in the middle there. So, but to your point, that's a good thing though, that you can shorten your upfront time to have a really targeted study design, of course, and also the outcomes and how to quickly evaluate that or whatever. And one of the things that obviously we're looking at all these parameters that we're layering into NutriSelect's engine. And by the way, I'm not just a science geek. I'm actually coding our MVPs. So I just finished and launched. You saw in the news yesterday. We launched MVP version 2, which I coded. I spent a lot of time doing that. It's fun. I'm having fun doing it. I'm having fun because I'm learning so much from doing this process. And it also, because I have the domain expertise, I know what to tell it to do to build that freaking platform in the first place, right? Being a consumer, right? Being a scientist, this is the information we want to have. So that's exciting to me. And it's educational. So think about the consumers in terms of if they have the right tools presented to them that are robust, that they can trust, it's going to be highly educational for them and save them time at the end of the day. So that's kind of leading into our last section here, which is, where are we going in the next 3 to 5 years? What does it look like? So we'll just go around the screen here and have everybody jump in and give their predictions of where things are going. And I'll save mine for last because maybe I'm a little more visionary about this. I don't know. Crazy. Elijah, what do you?
Yeah, I'll start you off. I mean, I've thought about this quite a bit. In 3 to 5 years, I see product credibility won't just be claimed, it will be scored. That's really where we're going. Labels will be analyzed against clinical doses, effect sizes, formulation coherence. Credibility will be measurable, not just a marketable piece, right? So credibility will move from storytelling, in my opinion, to structural integrity. Like right now, labels are brochures, essentially, right? In a few years, they're going to be report cards. So that's personally where I see things next 3 to 5 years with the influence of AI, where we are experiencing a very positive evolution in terms of product delivery, efficaciousness, and putting the power of people's health back into the hands of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Xenia.
I agree. I think patients, people, consumers, whatever you want to refer to them as, participants, they are all becoming significantly more educated and empowered with these tools. I think that is a great thing. I think we will see more evidence generation done across the board, not just in the supplement space and in nutraceuticals, but in biotech, among academics. And what I would hope for, and we just launched our early stage program, but I would hope in areas that have been underrepresented, chronically underfunded. What these tools are doing is lowering the barrier to being able to ask meaningful questions. And it's both my hope and I see it all the time, right? We talk to brands who, when they hear about change, how all of the players in the space, not just us, are trying to lower the barriers to access financially. And they hear about that pricing, they say, I am so excited, not just to run one study, but to run 2 or 3. Of course there are bad actors, but I don't think that the supplement industry has ever wanted to not do more research, to not generate more evidence. It has simply been incredibly out of reach, and it's been a pharma model and a traditional site-based model that hasn't, fit. Now with these tools, we're developing things that can fit for both consumer and researcher and nutraceutical company. I think there's going to be more of that, and I think it'll be interesting to see. Fingers crossed. Lots happening on the regulatory landscape, though, so I'll throw that in as a wrench for later.
Yeah. Gene, how about you, man?
So I think that just sort of echoing a couple of things that have been said already, but I think that AI will do 2 things to this industry. It'll help elevate it, and it'll help expose its weaknesses, both. And so what's going to happen is when you have the bad players, it's going to become far more evident. And when you have the good players doing the right stuff, that also is going to become far more evident. And to Xenia's point, that's going to mean that brands are going to really need to put some effort into doing the research. And in fact, I wouldn't wait for 3 to 5 years. If I was a brand owner out there right now, I'd put it into the budget and I'd start doing it now. So that you're well placed. You're well placed to call Xenia. You're well placed to be able to support the claims and look good as AI evaluates and announces its results.
I think the typical thing is say in the next 3 to 5 years, but I got to tell you guys, in 5 years, I'm probably out of the industry. Okay, because I'm already going to be exited with NutriSelect because someone's going to buy our IP and intelligence platform we're building. I already know that. The industry, this was the take-home message in December at the CRM webinar. If you're not already thinking about this, and by the way, I've had lots of discussions with major brands we all know, ingredient companies, product brands, who have a little hesitancy because they don't see it as real yet. Okay, they're in that. It's only the forward-thinking companies that are jumping on board. We just signed on Salabia Nutrition this week in the accelerator. They totally get it. Okay, and so the reality is, the bigger companies are always slower to move, aren't they? Right. So they're gonna, when it starts hitting their radar, it's going to sneak up on them. Then they're going to be scrambling, knocking down our door and saying, okay, we need to get our products and scored here, because guess what? The consumer buying habits are going to be changed. If I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. And some others are trying to do it in some way, because that's where the technology is going. And so, and it's actually for the better. So that means it's better for consumers, because in my opinion, as long as I've been in this industry, we do not do a good job of servicing the end consumer. We really don't. We talk like we do, but do we actually really live up to that promise? And the answer is no. Look at all the frustration out there with consumers trying to buy products and they throw their hands up in the air and say, I'm not searching anymore. So anyway, that's all going to change. The whole landscape of the industry, every trade show that we go to today, that whole dynamic's going to change. Okay. In the next 2 to 3 years, actually, less than that, not 5. In 5, it's all going to be done. Okay. So really, it will be. And so, you know how NBJ puts out their marketing data reports every year? Guess what NutriSelect's going to be doing? Our science data reports every year. Okay. That's going to show where it's going with thousands and thousands of data points inputting into our engine from real world evidence. That's really the key here, right? Zena, you talk about democratized and decentralized. Nutraselect's building that platform that is essentially the largest decentralized clinical trial on every population demographic in real time for every indication. That's where we're going. So that's my vision for what to build. And I'm doing that because I want to see the consumers truly have products that really work for them. And I want to call back to just one last point here, and then we'll wrap it up. But, Elijah, you said was really a good point, is that these subtle differences in terms statistically significant versus actually the benefit that the user receives. It's a complex matrix in that sense, right? We're not going to be able to split hairs on, okay, this should work for you because it was statistically significant. But the benefit of having thousands of data points from real world evidence from multiple demographics is going to train that LLM model to know what is statistically truly significant, right? In terms of outcome. In fact, if I'll just take melatonin as an example, because I have personal experience with this as the global R&D lead for Sanofi and heading up mental wellness category. Melatonin research covers anywhere from 0.5 milligrams to up to 10 milligrams, but it's a bell curve, right? And so 0.5 milligram for jet lag, 1 milligram for sleep onset, 3 milligrams sleep quality. But then after you get past 3 milligrams, 5 milligrams, even though you can sell 10 milligrams in Canada and the US, there's no value add in terms of the additional, there's not enough research to support any value add for melatonin. So that kind of dose fidelity for commodity type ingredients like vitamin C is another good example. We're going to be able to identify that with our platform. So it's not going to be hyped up like take 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. Well, maybe you only need 300 for the whole population, and that's what the sweet spot is, right? Okay, we're going to find out what those numbers are. We're going to dial into that. So that's a little more than my prediction, but that's where I see us going.
Before we leave, Doug, like imagine something else.
Well, that's the idea.
Even deeper than that, right? Imagine finding that a higher dose of melatonin helps a perimenopausal population or a menopausal population, or a population at a certain experiencing a certain weather phenomenon, changes in, there are all of these things that encompass what it is to be a human being and experience health. You're able to measure and incorporate those. I mean, that is the promise, I think, of AI.
Yep. I love it. And that's the flip side, right? We're going to identify, which I love, because as we go through and score these product portfolios for these ingredient companies and eventually product brands, the product brands are not knocking down my door right now. Okay. You know why? Because part of them don't want to know and don't want to go there yet. But the ingredient companies, the ones that get it, are want to be positioned obviously for that. But I think it's exciting to me that the gaps that we're going to identify that no one even thought of before. You just, Zena, you pointed that one out, which is cool. We'll make from all the data collated together, identify new targets, new ways to use a particular ingredient that no one's even considered because it's always driven by marketing trends or what they thought the consumer wanted or whatever, right? Yeah, which is what I love. Anyway, we are out of time, guys. And we could go on. I know, but maybe we'll revisit this again. I think we should do this again several months down the road and see take the temperature of what's happened since then. I think that'd be great to do a revisit on this topic. But so, Gene, any last time of comments? And I'm good here for me. But
no, I feel like our guests and have really covered the gamut of what we needed to cover here. So I don't think there's a whole lot more for me to add at this point beyond what we've already discussed.
Yep, great. Well, Elijah, Zena, thank you both for joining us today. This is an awesome discussion. I love having these kinds of conversations. So let's continue the conversation in the industry. Let's continue to push forward evidence-based supplementation, whatever form that's going to look like. I don't have a crystal ball. It could be totally different than what I'm thinking it's going to be, but let's see where it goes. I don't know. I might have a little bit of an idea.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
All right, I'm going to take us out of here. And for our next podcast, Gene, I forgot what our topic is, but it'll be next month. It'll be after Expo when everybody gets back from Expo and stuff. So,
Absolutely.
all right. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to take us out of here.